welcome to Authentic Selling's B2B Sales. Where do I start? We're going to go right back to basics, right back to the beginning. For those of you who are really maybe a little bit overwhelmed with all the information out there about B2B sales, and we're going to go back to basics so that you've really got a good idea of where to get started with things. So what is selling then? What do we think selling is? And what we're talking about today, of course, is selling to businesses. When we're selling to businesses, what are we doing? So selling really is about solving customers' challenges. So we want to understand what are the problems, what are the concerns, what are the challenges that our customer is having? And by the customer, we mean the business that we're selling to. And how does our product, our solution solve that? B2B sales is also about taking a customer from their point of interest to a positive outcome for both them and for you. And it should be a positive outcome for both of you. And if you really believe in what you're selling and believe in what you're doing, then that should be a given. That you know if your customer, if that person that you're speaking with takes on your service, that it's going to be a positive outcome for them and it's going to be great for them. So we always want to be authentic in the way that we approach this. We can just be ourselves. There's no specific personality that you need to be to sell. You don't have to be extroverted. You don't have to be someone that has the gift of the gab. And in fact, when I was training salespeople and coaching salespeople, often those that were very, very chatty were not the best salespeople because they would sometimes talk over people, they would talk too much, and they wouldn't listen to what the customer was saying. So whatever your personality is, you can be yourself, you can express yourself. And I love this quote from Bruce Lee: always be yourself, express yourself, and don't go out and look for a successful personality in someone else or to duplicate it. So just be yourself. So the reality is sales isn't a magic formula. It's a process that you can learn and that you can follow. You just need to understand that process and the mechanics of it, how it works, and a toolkit to help you. So let's start at the beginning, sales funnel. So what is a sales funnel? So it is called a funnel because it looks like a funnel. We've got more at the top than at the bottom. And I use these definitions for a very simple traditional kind of sales funnel. So at the top, we have our prospects. So these are all of the people that we think would be interested in our product or our service. So for example, if you go to a networking event, with your target market, the people in that room are your prospects. Yeah. Now, leads are when someone shows interest in what you do. So if you're in a networking event and you speak to someone and they're interested in what you do, that's your lead. Yeah. An opportunity, a sales opportunity, is when you've done what we call qualified that lead, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, to check that that is a real opportunity, okay? And that you're in active discussion with them about working together, about them using your product or solution. And of course, a closed sale is when you get a signed agreement. So just to be clear, a closed sale is not when someone says, yes, I'd like to work with you. You're not there yet until you get some paperwork to confirm the arrangement. So just remember that. One of the things that I talk with about people when they're first starting out are just some of the basic metrics that you should expect or that you can expect when you're working this kind of stuff. So I use the idea of the 3-to-1 rule to keep it really simple. And that is, for every 3 people you speak with, you might hope to get 1 interested person. Now, at the very top of the funnel, that can be more sometimes because you don't know until you speak with someone, perhaps if they're even in your target market. But once we get to an interested party, a lead, for every 3 leads we speak with, we would hope to get 1 qualified opportunity. And for every 3 qualified opportunities, we'd hope to get at least 1 closed sale. Now, some people will say, look, you can do better than that. You can do better metrics. And sure, you can. But when you're starting out, this is a good benchmark to have. And what this also does for you is it helps you to know, okay, if I want 3 closed sales, I need to be having at least 9 active opportunities on the go. Yeah. And the other thing that you can think about then is, okay, from my lead generation perspective, how many leads do I want to be feeding into that top of the funnel so that I can work on those leads and get those active opportunities? Yeah. So a little bit about the lingo and the language. Again, for those of us that are new, you might hear the term sales cycle and you'll hear me refer to this. When I'm talking about the sales cycle, it's all I'm saying is how long it takes from the point of time when someone shows interest until you close that deal. Now, that is often in B2B sales, it might be, say, 3 months or 6 months. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's different for business sales than a consumer sale. But that's all we mean when we're talking about a sales cycle, is the time it takes from the point someone shows interest until you close a sale on average. You might also hear the term hit rate. So all that means is, what are your metrics from when you get a qualified opportunity to when you close a deal? Now, if you go out there and Google selling, you'll get all these kind of language and terms about how you can really improve your close rate and your hit rate and all this sort of stuff. But all we're talking about is, what is your ratio from your qualified opportunity to a closed deal? And if you're at about 3 to 1, you're doing okay. So what is the difference between sales and marketing? This is a very common question that I get. So to keep it really simple, traditionally, marketing filled the top of the funnel, and we're talking about in business sales here. Marketing filled the top of the funnel and then created leads that the sales team took over and then tried to close the deal. Yeah, so that's traditionally how things worked. And a lot of businesses still work that way. It's not necessarily a bad way to work. However, I would say that in today's world, the most successful companies work the full funnel, work the full customer journey. So a marketing team would be working right from the top of the funnel on helping to nurture leads right the way through to a closed sale. But also the best salespeople do their own prospecting. So they get out there, they network, they meet with people, and they create their own leads, and they do not rely on marketing for leads. So one way to think about it is, marketing is a one-to-many conversation. Yeah, so how do I reach a lot of people and maybe bring those people to me to have that conversation? And when we're talking about sales, particularly B2B sales, it's a one-to-one conversation. So from that time that I'm at a networking event and I'm speaking individually to a person, that's a sales engagement, which is a bit different to marketing, where I might be doing some great stuff on social media, for example. So what's the difference generally between B2B, B2C sales? And first of all, let me just explain what we mean by B2B. Simply means business to business, and B2C means business to consumer. You'll also sometimes see that referred to as D2C, direct to consumer. Yeah, it's the same thing. But what we're talking about today is when you're selling to other businesses, which is B2B. So what's the difference? So one of the main differences is that the size of what you're selling, the dollar value, is often larger, almost always larger. So for example, if you're selling something to a business, it could be $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, okay, depending on what you're selling. Also, often what you're selling to businesses is more complex. So back in my software days, there would be a lot of technical things that would be involved in the solution that I was selling. And that would mean there'd be a lot more to explain to the customer about what my product is and what it does. So depending on what you're selling to businesses, it might be more complex than something that you'd sell to a consumer, an individual consumer. With those two things in mind, B2B sales are generally have longer sales cycles. So that time frame from point of interest to closing is usually longer than it would be for a consumer sale. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. When I was selling, large enterprise software, a 12-month sales cycle wasn't uncommon. Yeah. The other thing with business to business sales is that usually there are multiple people involved in making the decision. So when you're selling into a large organization, often there will be multiple people involved in making the decision to buy something. There might be the business owner, so the person that's actually going to be using the product. There might be their boss, that might be the budget owner. There might be other influencers involved, like a procurement team, for example. There can be multiple people involved, and you need to be able to understand who they are and sell to each of those. And in large organizations, in large corporates, there can also be a lot of internal processes that you might need to understand. So I mentioned procurement. There might be a procurement process that you need to unravel and understand. You might need to become listed as a supplier with your organization before they can actually buy what you sell. There might be legal processes and so on and so forth. And you need to understand what they are so that you can navigate them and find your way through. And they will be different for each business that you sell into. So remember, sales is a conversation. Each interaction we have, we aim to move the conversation forward, and we ask questions and we listen to the answers. So if we think about B2B sales as a conversation, we're not just doing all the talking, we're actually wanting to get the customer to talk quite a lot as well. So, okay, we understand the basics there. So how do we actually do it? How do we actually move people through from that point of interest to a closed opportunity? Well, we use a process. We walk them through a structured process. And I work to this very simple sales process, which is a very traditional sales process. Now, one of the comments that I often get when I first talk about process with people is life isn't a straight line. Things don't work that way. And that's absolutely true. But if we think about this from the perspective, if you were learning to play a musical instrument, for example, you have to learn the structure first. You have to learn the notes. You have to learn to read the notes and how to play some music. Once you've got those basics in place, then you can play all sorts of different tunes. You can play rock and roll, you can play classical, you can play jazz. But you need to know the basics of the notes and how to play your instrument first. And that's what we do here. And once you get used to it, you'll find that there'll be more flexibility in how you move through that. So why a process? It gives you a structure to work to. So when we're starting out, I mentioned that we often can feel a bit overwhelmed. There's so much information. What do I need to know? So having a structure helps you to know where you're up to, gives you a goal to work towards, but it knows, at each point of the process, okay, what am I doing now? Okay, at this meeting, what should I be doing? Yeah. And you're able to then move people through to the next step. So I'm going to take you briefly through each step of that process and just give you a little bit of understanding of what happens at each step. So the first one is prospecting. So I mentioned from a sales perspective, this might be at a networking event. So prospecting is simply where you make first contact with people about those that might be interested in your product. That's where we go to a networking event, we reach out and we have conversations, okay? And it's also the part of the sales cycle that most involves some marketing as well. Qualification. So this is the piece that if you're new to B2B sales, you might not have heard before, or people often skip, but it's actually one of the most important parts of selling to businesses. So the point of qualification is to make sure that you want to sell to this customer rather than that they want to buy what you want. Yeah, so it's thinking about it the other way around. Are they the right fit for me? There's two key things that you need to qualify on at the very beginning. And one is, do they have enough money for my product? Yeah. And so one of the things that happens often when people are starting out selling is that someone says they're really interested, you get really excited, you spend a lot of time in meetings and conversations, and you get 3 months down the track and you give them a price and they go, oh, that's way beyond our budget, or they haven't actually got permission or sign off for that budget. So you want to have those conversations very early and what we call qualify to make sure that they have the budget for what you're selling. The other main thing that we're qualifying for is the person. So am I speaking with the right person? So in that scenario where you might have a person that's really keen on having your solution in their organization, that's great. And that's what we call a champion. But if they don't actually own the budget, if they can't actually sign off on what you do, then you can again waste a lot of time and nothing will ever happen. So you need to understand who the right person or people are in the organization. The third step is discovery. And this is one of the parts of the sales process that I enjoy the most. This is when you get to sit down and have a really great conversation with somebody that's interested in what you do and find out all about their business. You ask a lot of questions in discovery, but the point of discovery is to capture everything that you need so that you can go back with a really great suggested solution. It's not an endless conversation that loops around and is just a lot of fun, although it can be a lot of fun, it has an intent. So your discovery questions should really be focused on, what do I need to know to be able to go back and present a really good suggested solution to the customer? Now, if you're selling into a large organization, you might need to have multiple discovery calls with different people in the organization. So say, for example, I was selling in HR software or training software. I might need to meet with the HR team to make sure that I understand their requirements and what they need. But I might also need to meet with the IT team and the technical team to make sure that the tech fits with their technology. And there might be other people that I'd need to meet with to make sure that I captured all of those requirements. The fourth step is presentation. Now, depending on the size of what you're selling, some people might truncate this and include a proposal stage in the presentation together. But just to keep it simple for today, in an ideal world, you would go back and you would present a suggested solution before you go back with a full proposal. And the reason you do this in larger opportunities is it gives the opportunity for discussion so that you can get feedback and iterate and change what is needed to make sure that you've got a really great solution and it hits all of the points that they've spoken about. So one of the mistakes that people make when they're first starting out again is that they try and rush the process a little bit and go straight to a close. Now, you will get a feel over time for when you can, get a decision, but what's really important is to do what we call in the next step is draw out objections, so objection handling. So imagine you're in a room and you're presenting to people your solution. There might be someone sitting in the corner that's really quiet. Everybody's kind of agreeing and nodding their heads. That's great. But that person that's sitting there quietly might have something that's bothering them that they're not telling you. And so what we want to do when we present back a suggested solution is we want to ask people, are there any other reasons? Is there any reason why you wouldn't go ahead? Try and draw out what their questions, what their objections are. And that's all an objection is. It's a question or something that's stopping them from moving ahead that we could address. If we don't draw them out, we can't address them. So what could happen is that quiet person in the corner might go away around the water cooler later that day, and they might be in the ear of the other saying, look, that was really great, but, I didn't want to say in the meeting, but blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that can derail your wholesale. So drawing out objections is good. Questions are good. Interaction is good. If everyone's just nodding ahead, just make sure that you're capturing everything. Once you've got all of that, then you can move to proposal. And your proposal, there really should be no surprises in a proposal. In an ideal world, it should capture everything that you've spoken about and everyone should know what's going to be in there. And it's really just confirming what you've spoken about so they can go, yep, that's good, let's go. Yeah. And it also is something that might, of course, be sent on to somebody else in the organization. And so the idea is that you've done all the work already. You've captured all of the issues, all of the questions, you've addressed them all so that by the time they get a nice clean proposal, that's all laid out really clearly and it makes it easy for someone to make a decision. And then, of course, we've got contract. Now, sometimes and quite often this will happen in parallel. So once people give you a verbal yes, you might be doing contract approval in parallel. But in large organizations, that can be a process in itself. So depending on their internal processes, they might expect that the operational people go through and get all of their information, and then they go through to a procurement process that might sort of start almost again. Again, this differs from business to business. But the key thing I would say is you want to keep your legal discussions separate to your commercial discussions, and you can actually get a long way along with your contract approval and then just pop the commercials in. Yeah, and usually they're different people that agree on those things. So for example, pricing is actually not usually a legal discussion. That's a commercial discussion. And your contract approval is just about the actual what's in the agreement. Yeah, just a reminder as well that just because you've got a positive yes on your proposal until you get your contract through, you don't actually have a deal. But obviously the goal here is to have a signed agreement. Now, again, if you're out there looking for information on B2B sales, everybody's talking about closing and they're like, aren't you going to talk about how to close the deal? Well, of course, we do need to close deals. But you can see by what I've talked through there that the bulk of the work is happening earlier in the sales process. And if you do everything along the way, when you get to the end, the actual signing of the agreement shouldn't be the most difficult part. You have actually done the bulk of the work already. Yeah. Particularly in large opportunities, in large sales, the signing of the agreement really is just a formality of everything that's come before. So with that in mind, it is possible you can learn to understand each step of this process and how to move someone through that journey. And what you want to understand is, what do I need to do at each step of the way? And you do this by building out a customized set of tools. So what does that look like? You start with, at the prospecting level, what's my target list of customers? Now, this is a little bit different to, say, a marketing persona, which is also important, but a little bit different. What I'm talking about here is, what businesses would I like to have as customers? Who are my targets? A really good place to start, if you've got any existing customers, what industry are you in? What's their sort of profile? How big are they? And is that a good profile for me to take moving forward to identify some new customers? So it might be, for example, I'm going to target all of the businesses in the Sydney region who are focused on education, for example. Or it might be, I was speaking to someone the other day that was saying, okay, I really want to target people that are supplying Bunnings because then I know they're going to be a really good fit for what I do. You'll work out what's right for you. And then you want your list of qualification questions. So qualification questions might be a relatively short list, but it's about those budget questions and, am I speaking with the right person? Then discovery, and this can be a larger set of questions depending on what you do and what you need to be able to go back with a really great solution. So you can plan that out. And one of the benefits of spending a bit of time actually writing out your discovery questions rather than just kind of doing it ad hoc is that you have a structured plan for your meetings, and you can actually use that to make it easier for yourself and make the best use of your time in those discovery meetings and calls. Obviously, you need a simple presentation template. Now, a sales presentation is not a TED Talk. We're not trying to present like a TED Talk to people. We're trying to show that we understand the customer's challenges, how we're going to address them, and how we're going to deliver on those things to meet those challenges. So keeping it really simple and to that agenda is good. Objection handling, this is your list of questions. So every time you get asked a question, at any point during the sales cycle, write it down and write down your answer and keep a list and a record. And over time, you'll be able to get a really good stack of questions that you can refer back to, so that when people come to you, you go, oh, yes, I've had that one before, and this is how I'm going to address that. And the other thing you can do when you do that is you might find that you sort of preempt some of those objections earlier in the sales cycle so that you're addressing them earlier. They don't sort of hang around. Then, of course, the proposal template, as I said, should be no surprises. Again, keeping it simple. A proposal should be different to your presentation. So I recommend having slides and a proposal a separate document, and the proposal has more detail. And the proposal should generally have an executive summary to keep it really easy for someone, again, if you're passing it on to others in the organization, so that it's easy for someone to see what they need, make a decision. And an agreement template, which I would recommend is separate to your proposal. For a couple of things that you can start right now. These are my golden rules for selling. They seem really obvious, but the first one is believe in what you're selling. And as founders, you should all be there. So you're 80% ahead of many people out there already. The second is don't lie. Now, people always laugh when I say this, but I say it because what often happens is people that are new to selling, they get nervous, they get asked a question, and instead of saying, I'm sorry, I don't know, let me come back to you, they try and make it up on the spot, and then you dig yourself into a hole and it's just very hard to get out of. So don't do that. Always say, I'm sorry, I don't know, and I'll come back to you. They're the golden rules. Using questions is really powerful. I talk about this a lot. Anyone that joins my webinars know that I talk about questions a lot. So questions draw people to us. Statements tend to push people away. So to give you an example, back when I was selling software, one of the businesses that I was selling, the products that I was selling in the service, we had really great technical support. And that was one of our key things that we wanted people to know about. Now, I could say to someone, we've got excellent technical support. And they go, okay. And they can then choose whether to accept or not accept that statement. Yeah. Or I could say something like, how important is technical support to you? And hopefully what that's doing is they will, 90% of the time they say, oh, actually technical support's pretty important. Yeah. And then I'm getting them to say that. Yeah. And then we can have a conversation about that. Yeah. So we're getting them to say it rather than me saying it, which is much more powerful. The other thing about questions is that they lead the conversation. So if you think about if you're at a party with a bunch of people and there's someone there talking to you and you're thinking, wow, this conversation is really boring. I don't know how to get out of it. One of the best things you can do is to ask a question that's leading you in a different direction. Yeah. Because the questions lead the conversation. Yeah. So asking questions enable you to keep things on track. And that is really important because we often have a specific amount of time and you've probably got a lot that you're trying to get done in a specific amount of time. So ask questions to get things back on track and to keep things going in the direction that you want. So there are some different types of questions, and these are two common types that people might already be familiar with. One is open questions and the other is closed. Now, one isn't better than the other. They're just different. So open questions are really good when you want to get the customer talking, which is really important in discovery, but it's actually important at lots of times in the sales cycle, because really most of the time we want them to be doing most of the talking. We want to be asking expansive questions like, how do you currently, can you describe, what is the process for? So that sort of thing is sort of ensuring that they give us a more expansive answer. Closed questions have a yes or no question or a one-word answer. So and they tend to be used more for qualification. So if I only worked in Sydney, for example, I might say, are you based in Sydney? Yes, no. Yeah. And that's also sometimes what you need to do. But if in doubt, when you're preparing for a discovery call, have a think about 2 or 3 nice open questions that will get the conversation going. Tip for you, at every interaction, every call, every meeting, have a goal for that interaction. Now, that goal might be to book the next call. It might be to say, on this call, I'm going to qualify that I'm speaking to the right person, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but make sure that it's something and you're always trying to move things forward. In longer sales cycle, it might just be a little incremental move forward, but try and get something from each interaction. And another tip is if you're on a call and you want to book a follow-up meeting, book it while you're on the call. So if someone says to you, yep, that's great, I'm happy to meet again. So, okay, great. Well, let's book that in now. I'm free next Thursday. Let's get that in the diary. And you obviously send the invite straight away or straight after the meeting. Yeah. And I'm happy to chat about this later. I know people sometimes have questions about the logistics of that, but it's a really good technique. So I've thrown a lot of information at you. I know it can feel like a lot, but these are simple things that you can learn to do, all of them, and you can start with 1 or 2 and work your way through. So remember, selling B2B is a conversation. It's a two-way conversation and it will take some time. So if you think of it in that context, you can then just work the process, break it down into the steps and go one step at a time. Okay, this meeting is my prospecting. I just need to get some interest and book in a meeting for the next discovery call. And practice. So think of every call and every meeting as practice. That helps to take away a lot of the nervousness, I think, that we might feel. And after every call or every meeting, I would always recommend that you sit down, you review what you've done in terms of your questions and how you've done things and see, what could I do better? What could I have, what wasn't so good? And what did I do well and what worked well? and keep learning each time. Then you just need to get out there and have a go. A big part of sales is just giving it a go and realizing that it is a human conversation interaction. It's never going to be super slick, and it shouldn't be, because life isn't like that. You are going to have times where you make mistakes, where you say the wrong thing all the time. That's part of it, and don't worry about that. And that's just part of the process. So just get out there and have a go.